himself known
Absolutely.
to us.
What's funny is in that Surprised by Joy, because I just had this, what I've been trying to explain to people is the damage that the evolution narrative is causing. And it's because it gives a whole bunch of presuppositions and kind of sets you up to believe that you're just this insignificant thing that just came up out of nowhere, and or whatever, just random acts of chance and all this. And I've been trying to encourage people to actually embrace the Christian creation story more, because and I got in trouble with certain trads because I said that the Christian story is like Genesis is mythology. That doesn't mean it's not true. It's a myth. And if you understand what C.S. Lewis is talking about in Surprised by Joy, he says Christianity is also a myth. It just happens to be a true myth. Like all these other stories are myths, and a myth is just something you base your culture on. So if we're now in a culture where they're trying to get rid of the Christian myth, the main Christian myth they want to get rid of is the creation myth, because your culture is founded, God, every single culture that has ever existed had a creation myth. Ours is in Genesis. And if you want to get rid of the Christian story, you have to start at the foundation, which is the creation myth. So I've been trying to just talk to people who are especially Catholics, who are just like, oh, evolution. It's like, guys, I know you want to talk about evolution and be okay with the modern world, but I'm just telling you, stop thinking like that. Like, embody the Christian story, including the Genesis story. It's the most important narrative to base your life on. Really understand that God gave us that story for a reason.
Yeah. And I think the more you get exposed, like Tom Holland is a good example of this, as somebody who, the more exposure, he's a historian and a writer.
We interviewed him.
Who aren't familiar with him. Oh, you did? Oh, awesome.
I interviewed him after Dominion. Dominion was like, it blew me away. I couldn't stop talking about it for months.
Yeah, so that's a good reference for what I'm trying to describe. It is his experience of like getting exposed to the classical world and then thinking, oh, this is so cool, this is so neat, and it's so like eclectic, like, oh, I can be a classicist, or I can be like those Roman pagans, and then becoming more familiar and realizing that, oh, these guys weren't so good, right? Like, there's some serious
culture is
here.
Nothing like my culture.
Yeah, if I want to stand up and announce that I reject certain things about Christianity and then say, but I identify with this, like, that's a bit crazy. But the more you get familiar, the more you get immersed in classical culture, I think the more I find in my own experience of that, it becomes harder and harder for me to embrace this sort of modern post-Enlightenment skepticism about mythology in general, as if it's just stories. Like even something like the Iliad, right? For the longest time, they were like, oh, that's just, it's like a fiction. And it's like, oh, and then they discovered the ruins of Troy, and then it's sort of like, oh, how about that, right? And what, there's sort of a moment for me when I was reading On the Incarnation by St. Athanasius. I think it was On the Incarnation, where he talks about like he's exhibiting a kind of proof for the divinity of Christ by saying, look what's happened since the reign of the church has begun. And one of the things he points out is that the demons are all gone. Right. And it's sort of like, oh, okay, yeah, primitive people and their superstitions. Right. But he's taking for granted that his audience was familiar with a time in which there were just demons everywhere. Right. Like, so you think about like what the Iliad portrays. And so, of course, there's a battle between the Spartans and the Trojans, but the gods are also participating in it. Right. They've got wagers. They're picking their favorite heroes. They're dictating how the events will play out. And it's like they're on the battlefield. And we look at that and we're like, oh, this is Homer just embellishing things. And it's like,
no, these gods were real, and these people really believed in these gods, and these gods made demands on these people. There was never a culture that was atheist, ever, right?
No,
so like you as a modern person could look back and you read Greek myths and you go, how do these people believe this nonsense? Because the gods were real. Like they're not God, but the gods were real. And the Bible even talks about that, right? Like, worship no other gods before me. These gods were very real. And if you go and you see the cults that formed around these gods, they were very scary. I mean, it really, it's so crazy that we're even coming up on this, because Rob gets annoyed when I talk about it. But
I don't, because I've read all of Tom's books.
We started, like, this show actually started getting interesting when we did a series on the Danielic mystery in the book of Ephesians. And what we did was we used Tom Holland's book to kind of give people, to take people into the ancient world, to show them like, look, guys, the ancient world is nothing like Caesar comes back after slaying 1 million Gauls and says, look at what I did, and holds it up as like, look at what I did, and brags about it. Now you have to think of modern culture. Modern culture is so Christianized, even though we're post-Christian, that we now, even when we go to war, we have to like hide the dirty things we do. Like, oh no, we didn't hurt we saved all the civilians that we could, and we only went because people are so Christianized, they just don't realize it. So we took them into the ancient world. We took them to show like some of these cults, like the cult of Cybele, where the priests would castrate themselves and wear women's clothing, and people would bring their children to see it. And it's like, guys, are you paying attention? These things are coming back, right? These gods were very real, and people are not recognizing that these gods are coming back. You just don't know that's what they are. These same practices are coming back. You just don't know. These are the gods these are the old gods that Christianity, it's really the city of God versus the city of man, right? So when you read Augustine, he's talking about, look, the altars of the gods are destroyed and you're seeing Christianity spread. This is how you know that the Christian story is real.
Well, if you return to like Athanasius, for me, that was a moment where I paused and I was like, what does he mean the demons are all gone? As if he's just taking it for granted that his readers would know the difference between a time when there were demons just everywhere and now they're all gone. And it's sort of like, well, why are they all gone? First of all, probably because there's a tabernacle on every city corner now, right? Like they've been sent out into the wilderness. And then I remember reading St. Anthony's biography, but I think I want to say St. Gregory, in which he goes out to the wilderness. And what does he find out in the wilderness? The demons, right? What are they doing out in the wilderness? Well, and they even say to him, what are you doing here? You're not supposed to be out here. This is where we are. Like they're annoyed that he's come out there, because it's like their last refuge that they have in the world, because they've been sent
scattered to the wind, because you have tabernacles
because of the incarnation.
The incarnation, you have priests waving incense, saying prayers, and they actually disperse the demons from the populace.
There's a reason why all the like scary stories, that they told happened in the woods, deep in the woods, because that's the only place left to the demons.
I'll tell this story too. This is, take this with a grain of salt, because I can't even cite where I remember reading this, but I remember reading about a story. So this would have been in like modern day Oregon, where there was a missionary who had come there, and he was doing missionary work with the indigenous people of the area, which is very similar to where I live. And some of the stories you'll hear about the missionaries who came here. And they were explaining the phenomenon of the Sasquatch, right? Which was this terrifying creature who would come and snatch their children and like eat them, right? And was constantly abducting people. And so the missionaries were like, okay, so they're trying to assess, is this like a bear? Is this a natural thing? And they're like, well, ever since you guys arrived, they've just disappeared. We don't know where they went. And so there's been some speculation by like, well, what were those crazy Sasquatches?
Well, now, like, let's take it into where we are now, right? So what you see is, so like in the time of Augustine, what you see is the temples are fading into ruin, and the temples of the old gods are falling into ruin, and some of them have become cathedrals and they've been baptized, and you cast these gods out. So what's going on now is you're seeing the Christian churches get sold to the secular world, and you're seeing they're becoming wedding venues, right? So now that happens, and you're giving rise for room for these demons to return. You're seeing even in this conversation about liturgy, the liturgy, because it's less important to the people, and because it's celebrated with less reverence, I really do think that's why you're seeing to think that they're not related, that the culture really takes a nosedive after the liturgy changes. I think that there's a very big I don't want to say it's all that. Of course, you have the Cultural Revolution going on at the time and all this stuff, but there's something to the changing of the liturgy and the culture collapsing. If you go back to like the Arthurian legend, it's weird because you have this time when King Arthur is accepts Christianity, but you still have those ancient gods still around, right? So like Queen Mab is there, and it's they're losing their power, these gods, and like I want to go back and revisit that story because it's such an interesting time where Christianity is spreading, but the old gods are still around in some respect.
Yeah, well, and there were those death knells of like pagan Rome as well, with characters like Julian the Apostate, right? Who was raised with Christian sensibilities, and obviously that marinating effect took root in him. But then he turned back towards paganism and wanted to produce this revival of paganism within the empire.
So when he
it wouldn't take shape.
But when he does that, it's so funny because when he does that, he starts telling his priests, you need to care for the poor, because the Christians are doing it, and it's like people are attracted to it, and he's yelling at the priests of Cybele, you need to start caring for the poor. You need to start caring for the poor, because he's hoping to attract people by introducing this Christian idea of you don't just treat the poor as garbage, because that's how they would have at that time. Now, Julian the Apostate is Constantine's nephew, and he tries to build the temple, the third temple, and every time he goes to do it, the ground quakes and the temple collapses.
Right. Yeah.
So it's so interesting when you really like, for anybody that's Tom Holland's book, especially the early chapters before the Reformation, because after the Reformation, I'm like, all right, here we go. Because he has this weird concept where he thinks Christianity is this like eternal revolution that's going. But those early chapters, so when I had him on, I said, Tom, you have to tell me how your mind was changed, because you can't possibly have read the church fathers. I mean, this guy read the church fathers. He's the whole early chapters of him quoting church fathers and their meditations on the cross and the crucifixion. Like, you can't walk away from that without having an impact on you. Like, how is your view of the Catholic Church changed? Because he grew up as an Anglican thinking the Jesuits were like the most evil cabal in the world, and not my modern Jesuits, who knows, but
might not be wrong.
But he actually told us how his opinion of Catholicism just is such drastically different from his upbringing, because he encountered how much the Catholics did for the Western world.
He said he even kind of lives according to the liturgical calendar now.
Yeah,
because of the discipline it brings.
Yeah,
that's something I don't understand, is the people who, I mean, maybe Jordan Peterson would be another kind of person who really grows in sympathy for the faith, but I don't know, there's like this invisible barrier that they can't get through.
Like Barry Schwartz, we interviewed him on the Shroud of Turin.
Oh, right. Yeah, he's a good example.
I think Jordan will become Catholic. His wife already has. She's praying the rosary for him every day, right? I think part of what I think he's doing is, I think he's still trying to remain having these conversations, because whenever he gets in a conversation with somebody who doesn't believe in God, he is like one of the greatest defenders of the existence of God once he encounters that. But something in him hasn't clicked yet. But you see, every time he talks about Jesus, he tears up. I've seen 4 or 5 interviews where when he talks about Jesus, he weeps. I mean, especially when he first came out of his sickness. Yeah. He had a conversation with Jonathan Peugeot that was just like phenomenal. He was talking about the story of Jesus, and he's like, and I probably believe that, and I don't know why. It doesn't make sense to me. And he's just crying as he's saying it,
Yeah. Well, I'm just encounters with any sort of transcendental will do that to some degree, like relaying our own experiences of liturgy and me going to, or that clip that we showed and going to beautiful cathedrals. It's like, there is something moving about it. My dad, who was an atheist at the time, they went to Ephesus and went to the shrine where Our Lady and St. John supposedly lived. And he said, like, there was something about that place. I couldn't tell you what it was, but it was so moving. There is something about that just speaks to the very heart of our humanity, to whatever degree
even
we have
Ephesus, where John takes Our Lady. So Artemis Ephesia is the Virgin Mother goddess, and it's John brings Our Lady, the true Virgin Mother, there to combat the demoness Artemis Ephesia, because she's a false Virgin Mother. There's so much like symbology in all of like the whole Christian story. Where do you see? Look, the the modern iteration of the Novus Ordo is kind of trapped in that boomer era. It's very like the irony of them talking about like being rigid and being backward is they're trapped in a time capsule in the 60s.
Yeah.
I'm not saying it's only going to be the traditional mass eventually, but there has to be something that changes in this, right? Because it feels like the young people are escaping to these more traditional parishes, and that's the Novus Ordo seems to be fading out just through age. So you think we'll see something in our lifetimes of maybe a restoration?
Yeah, I think so. I think we're young enough that we'll still see. I couldn't say exactly what it will look like, but I don't think it can carry on the way that it is. And we saw, it wasn't a Pew survey. It was some university had done a survey that came out fairly recently. You guys will know what I'm talking about, where they were comparing responses going back to like the 70s from clergy, from priests and newly ordained, and sort of the progression, the shift. And so they asked them like two questions: what are your political sympathies, and what are your theological ones? And it was like very conservative, or very traditional, very liberal, very progressive, whatever, right? And back in the 70s, the dominating force was very liberal, very progressive, whereas now it's very conservative, very traditional, to the point where the other side of the spectrum is virtually gone extinct, right? And so that can't but have a pretty dramatic effect. Simultaneously with the vocations crisis, the clergy vocations crisis, there's a gap, right? So there's like the boomer generation. They lost a lot after the council, but there's still quite a bit there, and a lot of them. Well, that's virtually all of our bishops, right? Yeah. And then Gen X. At least in my diocese, there was no vocations from Gen X. There was like 2 guys that got ordained from that generation here. And then like later Gen X and earlier millennials, there's a few more who start to get ordained and stuff, right? So there's this huge demographic gap, right? And right now is what's the very last of the baby boomers. As soon as they retire, you're going to get like 40-year-old bishops, 40 and 50-year-old bishops who are going to be there for a very, very long time, who are going to be very, very traditional in their sensibilities. So the effects of that, it's going to be a dramatic shift, but also simultaneously, they're also going to inherit this massive institution that there's not going to be enough of them to actually manage. So that's going to create all kinds of interesting dynamics that I could only speculate about what that's going to look like.
Do you think there's a schism coming in the church?
I don't know. I mean, on the one hand, any bishop who becomes a formal heretic loses his office, right? And we have that, like basically the entire German conference, they're no longer legitimate bishops based on what they've been promoting. So is that not a schism, frankly, right?
So my theory is that I think after Francis, we are going to, I think so many people have Francis fatigue, and I think that you're going to get a pope to the right of him. And I don't know how far right. I really don't. I don't know how far right. I don't think you need someone very far right of him for that schism to materialize, because I think everybody that's excited about what's going on in the church right now, they assume that that trajectory will continue. And if it takes even a slight step back, I think they will revolt. Like, you have to realize we're all in the church because we know this is the one church that Jesus Christ founded. We're not going anywhere. This is it. We're not leaving the Eucharist. I'm not so sure the other side feels the same way. I think that if you got a Benedict the 17th in, which is possible, if a Cardinal Sarah gets in or something, I really think you will have a material schism, and that's it. And you're going to get the church that Benedict spoke about in that 1970 radio address, where he said it will be much smaller, but the demands on the faithful will be much higher.
Yeah, I think that's manifestly coming true. But how it's going to play out, I mean, there's so many variables at play here that I could only speculate. I don't know. But that's a good point. I don't think we can go back to a Benedict, a successor to Benedict at this point.
No, I know.
Too much water has gone under that bridge that it's like, no, that's not.
Yeah. He was
the appropriate pontiff for that time, but something new has to happen at this point.
I don't think you can try to sell the hermeneutic of continuity. I don't think you can try to. I don't know.
I mean,
think
maybe you can, and I'm still very sympathetic to it. And in fact, it's church teaching that if something that comes out of the magisterium has the appearance of contradicting the tradition, the deposit of the faith, then you interpret it in the most traditional possible way that you can, right? So that's what we ought to do. But like Benedict came in as a successor to John Paul II, which had been, this calming of the chaos after the council, and a lot of like really great encyclicals, a lot of great thought, like the Catechism came out, which was just so indispensable. Imagine a time when, like right now, but without the Catechism. Like we have nothing that we can appeal to. So people are out there saying, "Oh, the church teaches this. The church teaches tolerance and inclusivity and diversity," and it's like, I got nothing to say to you. I can appeal to the church fathers. I can appeal to St. Thomas Aquinas, and they can just go, well, that was then, this is now, right? And it's like, the Catechism was the watershed where it was like, oh, finally, it was manna for people who actually were Orthodox, and they could say, no, this is what the church actually teaches, right? So a lot of good happened, and then Benedict sort of came in to kind of keep things in check.
Benedict seemed like he was like, okay, we're done with the council stuff. I'm going to change. I'm not going to be John Paul III. I'm going Benedict XVII. It's time to. We're done with the council. The council's good. Now let's look like he wanted to do something different. So like when you hear guys like Ralph Martin, who was he was around after the council, and he like all the craziness of the 80s and early late 70s, early 80s, and the craziness in the liturgy and all that stuff. He's like John Paul II and Benedict quelled a lot of that stuff and really did tamp it down. And it seems like all the stuff that they were dealing with back then has popped back up again. And that's the craziness of it. So I think you're right. Well, I mean, we'll see what happens. Only time will tell, I guess. Yeah,
it's the last gasp of that generation, and it will inevitably be gone. But how much damage they cause between now and then. And that's why I say we can't go back to a Benedict XVI, because he was a successor of something that was already happening, and then we've seen something very different take place, and it's like you can't just go back to trying to like calm the waters, right? Like you need someone in who can repair a lot of the division that is taking place. Oh
God,
now.
Please give us somebody.
Well, I'm kind of fearful of like the pendulum swinging too. Like I hate labels. I'm a pretty melancholic person. Like, don't label me, man. But I for all intents and purposes, I'm a trad now, right? Like most people would look at me and say I'm a trad, right? But a lot of what I find myself doing in the way I'm affiliating is sort of like a compromise, right? It's sort of like a Benedict option where we're like, oh, let's just huddle together, right? Because it's crazy out there, right?
Yeah.
But not as like a permanent thing. It's like we still have to go back out there and be missionaries and be martyrs if we have to. I don't know, but there has to be a way forward in the church. And again, I don't really know what that looks like, but I would be afraid of just sort of like the rad trad pendulum swinging back in. And a lot of people are saying like, we need a Pius XIII. And it's like, okay, maybe we do. But what you mean by a Pius XIII kind of scares me a little bit. Like I had posted the other day about that interview I did with Kevin. And I just said, hey, guys, go check out. I did an interview with someone who's a former traditional Catholic. And the comments came in from people that were just like, why would I listen to this? A former traditionalist? It was a good conversation. What do you mean, why would you want to listen? Like, and people were saying to me, why would you talk to that guy? And I'm like, what do you mean, why would I talk to him? Like, this is what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be missionaries. We're supposed to be evangelizing. We're supposed to be learning what are their hangups and trying to help them and to be salt of the earth, right? Like we're not isolationists. We're not just going to.
I'd say if
tradition and
if there's one mission I think that I want to do with this channel, it's to prevent trads from isolating themselves too much, where they separate themselves like that like you talk about schism. Like if you really think you can't have conversations with other Catholics, I don't know what you're doing. Like, I don't know, man. We're supposed to be talking to each other. We're all confused right now. Anybody who thinks they know exactly what's going on and they have all the answers, I'm telling you, I mean, I try to say as often as possible, like, I am very confused about what's going on. I don't know. I try not to ever make pronouncements on anything. I'm just trying to have conversations with people who I know love the church and love God, and they're doing their best to make sense of it as well right now.
Well, like we got a comment on our last video with Patrick Coffin today. You know, like, oh, he's a sedevacantist. Why would you have him on? And Anthony responded with, because he's my friend.
Yeah, right. You know, like my friend. Like, I mean, I have empathy for people who think Francis is an anti-pope. Like, that's not my position, but I understand it. Like, I understand why people think that. I'm not like to sit there and just say this person's crazy. And they're not crazy. They're confused. We're all confused. None of us really know. So I don't know, man. I think we got to be careful not to cut people off that don't agree with every single opinion we have.
Yeah. We have to be in dialogue with those who disagree with us. I mean, that's what it means to be missionaries. That's what Christ commissioned us to do as a church. And if we're not doing that, then we're gonna atrophy, right? And that's not a way forward.
Peter Diamond. What are you doing with your I know you're doing something with Catholic businesses up by you, right?
Yeah. What's that? It's not just where I'm. It's like our main focal point, like our target market, so to speak, is in the States, because that's just where the majority of English speaking Catholics are. So what it is, it's called the Fishers Network, and the idea is to try and form groups of leaders in their professions around parishes. So to be forming networking communities from amongst themselves, to get to know each other, to do whatever they can to mentor each other, help each other, spread business around to one another. I mean, we've all seen this done in other ethnic communities, right? Like, people always talk about Jewish communities being really good at this, right? Like trading business and helping each other out financially and whatever else, right? We as Catholics don't do this at all, and there's no reason why we shouldn't be, especially when we consider the corporal works of mercy, right? Like during COVID, I saw so many people losing their jobs, losing their businesses, and it's like, you'd see the odd person, and I did this, like handing envelopes of cash to people, just being like, hey, I hope this helps your family out, right? But it's like, if we were a little bit more mobilized in those efforts, there's just so much more we could be doing to helping each other and to like preventing those kinds of consequences from like affecting people in your community so much, right? Having sort of a collective voice, so to speak, right? That was something that after the Industrial Revolution and after the various European revolutions, the popes in their social justice encyclicals were calling for associations of workers. And we never really did that. We never, like, we had trade unions happen, but they weren't speaking collectively with a Catholic voice. Certainly they become more Marxist as time goes on, right? And so what's the Catholic collective voice? And so we're trying to do that with like leaders, like business leaders, executives, leaders in academia, business owners, that kind of thing. And then hoping that as we build up that network, that they're going to be able to do more to help other workers in their community and
kind of like the old guild system.
Exactly. Yeah, it's the exact same kind of idea, because that's what was abolished during the revolutions, right?
Yeah.
We lost the guilds, and the popes were like, we need something, guys, and we didn't really do anything to replace that. So Fishers Network is one kind of attempt to do that.
It's like a parallel economy on top of that, but it's also what you're talking, like, you have to think when the next pandemic comes, and it doesn't have to be a pandemic like last time. It could be anything, whatever they throw at us next, right? So, and they're going to throw like that. It felt like that whole thing was a test run for something they're going to do in the future. And really, your local parish and the people that you have around you are going to be the most important thing. Like, you think about during the pandemic, I would have gone insane if I had to stay trapped in my house. Luckily, I had all my siblings and I had family members who were willing to break the rules to see each other, right? Otherwise, I would have been trapped in my house all by myself for a freaking year and a half. And it's like, you have to have networks of people that you can actually live with, you know? So I really think that's a great idea. How can people find that?
Fishersnetwork.com. That's the place to go. Yeah.
And is there anything else you got to promote?
No, that's all I'm working on.
We got questions.
Yeah. Oh, so we got questions. Yeah, bring them up.
The first one is someone wants a good book recommendation about Pius the Ninth, Italian unification, that sort of era?
That's a good question. I don't. Do you guys have any book recommendations? I don't know. I can't think of a book per se.
So much of that topic really comes at it more from the modern liberal side, and not really a good Catholic angle, unfortunately.
Yeah, that's a good point. It's a really hidden history. I talked about, like, again, I don't have a book recommendation, but I talked a bit about that in one of my recent videos, because Pius IX was elected to be something like what Pope Francis has become for so many voices, right? He was this moderate, kind of liberal in the sense that it would have really what that word would have meant in his era, who was sort of sympathetic and collegial towards all the revolutionaries. And this is the time of like the mid 19th century revolutions, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so he released revolutionaries from prisons in the Papal States and was promoting their cause everywhere. And as soon as they got out, they stabbed him in the back and invaded the Papal States, right?
Yep.
And so he goes from like this sort of like liberalizing voice to this super combative rad trad who writes something like the Syllabus of Errors, which like even some trads will read that and they'll blush today, right? Because it's like, oh boy, right? So he learned his lesson, right? That this sort of like conciliatory approach it's just like how we do personally with sin, right? It's like you liberalize your lifestyle towards sin and it will tear you down into the trenches of despair. You can't play with sin. You can't be diplomatic with sin. You have to destroy it. You have to kill it dead. And to do that with the evils of the world, the church it can't do that without suffering dire consequences. And I think we've been seeing that. We've been learning that lesson over and over, and we shouldn't, going back to the 19th century,
we're not learning the
lesson.
It. We're witnessing it happen, but we're not learning the lesson. That's the problem.
Yeah,
true.
That's right.
Second question is, what is your favorite guitar right now, and what do you like to play on guitar?
Yeah, so my favorite electric guitar has always been Gibson's. I played a variety of different guitars, but Gibson Les Paul I've always thought that that's just the coolest looking guitar. Although they're not the easiest to play of the different kinds of guitars I've played. But sadly, my guitars just are all in their cases in my storage room, kind of gathering dust. I do have, just to prove that I'm not lying here, I do have an acoustic here just in my bedroom that every now and then I'll get out and play some Johnny Cash tunes and do some sing-alongs with my kids and stuff. But, so that's about it. Yeah.
That's so funny. So we both grew up in the 90s. Like, right? Those are your formative years in the 90s.
Yep.
I played the guitar. I was in a band with my friends. It's like that era, man. We're the first millennials. So really, I think Gen X ends at 81 and then 82 starts the millennials. So we still got a taste of that going. Like my first cell phone was my senior year and it was like a Nextel, like with the radio, the point-to-point radio with a Nextel. And so we really are the first of those where I think, Rob, you had probably a cell phone through high school and stuff, right? Like we had beepers. Did you have a beeper, Brian?
No, I never did. No, I was a latecomer to like mobile technology.
We had a beeper, and it would be like I'm sorry, Rob. My wife, who was my girlfriend, like I've been been with my wife since we're 15, but we would beep each other messages and numbers, and you would know it that like 143 meant I love you and stuff. It's just such a weird time back then.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, only players had beepers from what I remember. Players or like doctors.
Anthony had one.
Yeah, exactly. You must have been smooth, man.
Was there any other questions, Rob?
Well, why don't you tell Brian how smooth you were? How did you get your wife interested in you?
So we're in like 8th grade, and my wife had like "I love Anthony Abadi" in her yearbook. And I see it written in her yearbook, and I'm like, "You're gonna be so hot when you get those braces off. As soon as you get those off, that's when we'll date."
That's awesome that you guys knew each other for that long. That's really beautiful.
We started dating at 15. I got a candle at her sweet 16. It's me and my wife have been best friends forever, man. I've been with her longer than I haven't. Cool. So Now my son is older than I was when I started dating my wife. It's crazy when you think how fast time goes, man.
Right. Yeah.
Oh, skiing or snowboarding?
Well, so as a child of the 90s, I was big into skateboarding, and that automatically translated into snowboarding.
You do it with your kids?
So my kids, yeah, we do. So we live pretty close to the Rocky Mountains. Like by close, I mean like 4 hours. So we can get to some pretty amazing ski hills. And for them, they're doing skiing though, because skiing just makes way more sense.
Teach. It's easier to
teach.
It's
way easier to learn. So snowboarding, I always say this to people: snowboarding is really hard to be a beginner at, but once you get over that initial hurdle, then it's really easy to get good at. But the first little while, like you're gonna have like I had a broken tailbone, like when I first was learning to snowboard. Your wrists, you're constantly gonna be falling on your wrists, you're gonna be catching edges and going over frontwards and stuff. Like it's really dangerous.
I broke my collarbone, I broke my thumb just from falling those first couple of times I went. So I got my older kids. It took me like 3 seasons to finally get them going on a snowboard. My youngest, I'm like, you're going on skis. I'm not doing this again. I taught her the pizza slice. I'm like, let's go.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So all my kids are skiing for that reason. Yeah. And I think I might even go back to skiing. I haven't done it since I was like 13, but I think I might go back to it.
I'm still snowboarding, man. We're going to New Hampshire in 2 weeks. I can't wait. So yeah, it's expensive. That's the problem, man. It's so expensive to go skiing.
It's crazy.
But Brian, dude, I'm so grateful you came on with us, man. This is such a fun conversation.
Yeah, me too. Thanks, Anthony and Rob. It's been a lot of fun.
You should do preaching, man. I'm telling you, you got my heart lit up while you were talking before. Have you done a lot of public speaking at like conferences and stuff?
No. Part of the challenge for me is that like I'm so remote from geographically from where a lot of the conferences would be. Like for me to go anywhere down in the States, I have to first fly to Toronto, which is like a good 4 or 5 hour flight east, and then head south. And so it's very discouraging for anybody who wants to try to book me, because it takes like extra days of travel and cost and expense and everything. And so, and I've been reluctant to do it for that reason too, because it's pretty difficult to be away.
Big Canada is. It's just humongous, Canada.
Yeah, it is. Yeah, but very scarcely populated. Most Canadians live below, like, so if you think of the parallel of like the U.S. border,
that's right where I'm at in Minnesota.
Okay, yeah. So north of Minnesota, that parallel border, and then Canada, like around the Great Lakes, it kind of dips down. Most Canadians live below that U.S. borderline. So we have this vast like geographical line. It's like Russia, right? Like all of Siberia, which is just like nobody lives there, right? Yeah.
So what's the weather now? Like, are you buried under snow or?
So this year's been really weird. Normally, we would have. So I live in kind of like a desert climate just west of the Rocky Mountains, or sorry, just east of the Rocky Mountains. But nonetheless, we still do get a reasonable amount of snow just because it's so cold. So when it snows here, it doesn't melt at all. It just keeps accumulating over the winter. And normally by November 1st, we'll get like our first big snowfall, and then it will be there till like April. We'll start to get a melt, right? But for some reason this year was like our first brown Christmas in a really, really long time. But then as soon as like January came in, we had like an insane cold snap a couple of weeks ago that we're just kind of coming out of now, where it was like, so I think Fahrenheit and Celsius, they intersected about like -30. And we were like down to -40, -50 Celsius.
Wow.
A couple weeks ago, which I was like,
Rob's in Minnesota,
I've never seen it that
same
cold.
thing. He'll send me like pictures of his thermometer in his car, and it's like -30.
Yeah, I'm on my way to work in the morning.
Yeah. I mean, if Rob lives close to Minnesota, it's pretty similar to what it's like there. Yeah.
You guys are sick. Oh man, Brian, thank you so much, dude. It's this was really fun. One of the coolest things about doing this show is just the different people we've been getting to talk to and just have conversations with. I'm really glad we were able to because you don't answer email, you don't answer anything. So just to even get in touch with you was tricky for a while there. I'm really glad we got to put this together, man.
Well, I appreciate the persistence because I am bad at email, and so I hope people don't take offense by that, but it's just I get overwhelmed by my inbox.
All right, man.
I'm glad to have done it. Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, down the road, we'll give you a few months off, and then we'll come and bug you again in a few months.
Sounds good.
This is very fun, man. We'll talk soon. We're gonna be. So Thursday we have Faith and Film. So we've been doing the last Thursday of the month. We do we pick a Catholic film or a religious film, and we kind of just take some of the themes in the film and discuss like how it relates to us in our faith and things like that. We're doing The Island on Thursday. So for everybody that wants to watch that episode, try to watch The Island. There's a free episode of it. There's a free version of it on YouTube. And we will see you guys Thursday night.
Have a good night, everyone.